Hello, everybody. Hello, and welcome to the stream. It's me, the company's expert, the company's expert. And hello to everybody who's joining me on this live stream. I see there are 7 people here. So if you're here and you're in the chat, you can see the chat on the right-hand side probably. Say hello in the chat. Say where you're listening from. It's a pleasure to be here with you. And welcome and congratulations to Jennifer Brownlow, the latest member of my YouTube channel. Members get additional videos, even more of me, and who wouldn't want that? So today, we're going to talk about something that I know is very important to a lot of people, and we're going to discuss job rejection. But more important than that, we're going to talk about if you've been rejected by, what was it? Rude, incompetent, ridiculous and unprofessional interviewers. And this is something that is quite prevalent. And it's funny because I go on the internet and you do a Google search or some kind of search for bad interviews, bad job interviews. And it's always how the candidate is bad. The candidate is unprofessional. The candidate, does inappropriate things and doesn't conduct himself properly. I find that funny because, yes, while there are some candidates that do that, there's far more interviewers that don't know this stuff either. And they don't know how to conduct a proper job interview. They don't know how to interact with people properly. They are rude. They are off-putting. And I don't understand why more people are not discussing this, because as far as I'm concerned, this is the elephant in the room. And I know a lot of you guys have encountered these people, and you probably have some very strong feelings about it. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Hello from Deutschland. Hello. Hello. Thank you. I got the little clap thing going there. So yes, it is great to have you here. You are what? I think you are 7 hours ahead of me. So it must be late over there right now. But thank you for joining me. It's great to see you here. Yes, this is something that's a huge deal. You know, a lot of you guys, a lot of people who are candidates that go to job interviews, you're going to be encountering some less than professional, less than pleasant interviewers, people who are arrogant, people who are entitled, people who are too busy, supposedly, to interact politely with others and treat people like human beings. You know, this is a common thing, and I don't understand why it's so prevalent. Radu says, hello, Bill. 2 weeks ago, I had one of the most unique job interviews I've ever experienced. It was for a senior project coordinator position. No doubt we'll be hearing more about that. Hello from France. Yes. Bonjour. Comment ça va? Est-ce que tu es en Paris ou tu es quelque part d'autre? Stubham. Hello to Stubham. Stubham. Yes. And, here we go. I got 2 feeds. That one's going faster, so I'll read that one, even though it's a little bit more awkward. Here we go. It's bigger. Okay, the reason I really enjoyed it was because all the questions the hiring manager and selection committee asked me were situational, behavioral, and opinion-based questions. Well, that's good. If you have a lot of stories on the tip of your mind, and a lot of the questions that they asked you were straightforward. They didn't ask you a lot of ridiculous questions that you really have to think about because they're so ludicrous. Yeah, that's good. Right on. I'm glad it was a positive experience. But today, what I wanted to focus on was more of the negative experiences, because I find this very interesting. You know, in business, generally speaking, communication skills and interpersonal skills are well regarded. It's a well-known fact that if you develop these, then it enables you to rise up to positions of more responsibility, positions where you will be managing people and doing more communication. And those types of roles really enable you to have a lot of influence and a lot of decision-making power. Because let's face it, a lot of decisions that you have to make, a lot of times it's going to require interaction with a lot of different people and a lot of different types of people. So these are very well regarded. However, in the world of job interviews, we seem to break that rule for some reason. I'm not sure why. We're going to get into it. Yes, I'm going to start out by trying to read everything that people post in the chat. If it gets if there's too much and I can't keep up with it, I apologize. But I've got to sort of make this work. The last chat I did, I was hard pressed to sort of keep up with all the questions and all the comments. So I'm going to try my best, but just be patient. Okay. Radu says, questions that were based on real-world situations that an employee in the role will actually face while on the job. Many of these situations actually being quite tricky to navigate. Well, if they're asking you intelligent, actual, real-world situations that are appropriate for that role, then yes, it can be a really good interview, especially when you are not changing careers and they're asking you about how you do your job. So you should hopefully have done very well with that. Let's see here. Oh man, how do you say that? El-Tigani. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. I'm terrible with names. I do it all the time. El-Tigani says, hello man, we love the work you do, man. Thank you very much, El-Tigani. I'd really appreciate that. And I'm very flattered that you are all here. Okay, Stubham says, how do you answer? Tell me one reason why I shouldn't hire you for this position. Well, see the answer for what is your weakness, okay? Because that's what that question is another form of, okay? He-Mant Choan says, hello, recently I had to schedule an interview for a position at Ferrari. Wow, right on. Worst thing is no call ever came. Yep. That's the ghosting. That's kind of the standard thing nowadays, apparently. And we're going to talk about that. Hello to William. Awaken the Sage. I recognize that name. I have interacted with you before, Awaken the Sage. You are very authentic and insightful. Thank you. The world would be a much better place if all CEOs were like you. Trust me, I have weaknesses to make up for it. So I really appreciate it, but we all try and put forward our game face and show off our strengths rather than our weaknesses. But thank you. And Bushra says, 2 weeks ago, I gave a job interview for a remote position. The HR recruiter was late. She was quite unresponsive and didn't match my enthusiasm. Now it's been 2 weeks and they are not responding. That's excellent from the point of view of this live stream. Let's start with that, okay? You know, that is typical. And a lot of you guys, I'm sure, have encountered this before, okay? The recruiter is late. Now, what does that say? What would happen to you if you were late for the job interview? Well, it's the only thing they have to go on when they get an impression of you, right? We don't know anything about this person, but they're already late, right? What's the conclusion? The conclusion is you're no good. And a lot of times you can't recover from something like that. Sometimes you can, but a lot of times you can't because that's all it takes. You had one chance to demonstrate your value, and before you even kick off the interview, already you've shown that there's a problem. Maybe your organizational skills are not very good. Your punctuality is not happening. So yes, they are going to make a judgment on you. But as a lot of people know, recruiters and hiring managers, whatever type of interviewer you're dealing with, a lot of times, this is how they operate. And you can't say anything back, right? You just have to sort of accept it. Now, the reality is that, you know, it is a two-way interview, okay? I will say that. That is technically true. However, the bigger reality is that a lot of jobs, you know, if you're interviewing with a recruiter, you may not have to work with the recruiter once you've landed the job, right? You may never see that recruiter again, actually. So just because the recruiter personally is unprofessional or incompetent, that doesn't necessarily mean that the job is bad. It could mean it, but it's not necessarily. It's not a given. So we have to put up with this kind of behavior. That's the bottom line. I'm going to try and read a few more comments before we really get into the meat and potatoes of this. Bushra says, and also they have a lot of negative reviews. Everybody is saying the same thing about them, and they just conduct interview and never respond. Yes. Well, listen, to play devil's advocate, most interviewers, and in particular recruiters, they're going to be saying no to far more people than they're going to be saying yes. So just that in itself isn't really a huge red flag. Also, unfortunately, for some reason these days, ghosting people has become pretty much standard. And I understand why it happens. It's because it's the most efficient way to deliver bad news. You just don't lift a finger to do it, and people eventually get the message, right? And then on top of that, you block all calls and don't respond to messages. So it's the default action when delivering bad news. And there are other areas in business where this is the norm. However, that being said, it's still poor form, okay? For example, and I back that up by saying, if you go to firms that do executive search, true executive search, do you really think that they treat CEO candidates like that? No, they don't, right? Because it's completely unprofessional and everybody knows it. So it's really a shame that they're treating mid-level and lower-level employees like that, when everybody knows this is not how you treat people professionally. They don't treat customers like that either, generally speaking. So I don't understand why a lot of organizations feel that it's perfectly normal to treat candidates like this. It may be more efficient in terms of HR metrics, but what people don't realize is that there's an intangible drawback to this. There's all kinds of damage that they're doing that's intangible. They're soiling the reputation of the organization. They're creating a lot of negative goodwill. And when you have accountants and things in charge that just look at sort of the direct costs, they don't factor that in. So if it is a conscious decision, it's the wrong one. And a lot of times it isn't a conscious decision, it's just incompetence. It's good when you guys agree with each other in the chat. That's awesome. Nestor says, it's best not to take rejection seriously. It's not personal. Yes, you're absolutely correct, Nestor. However, if you can do that, as the song goes, if you can do that, tell me how. Because the reality is that people do take it seriously because they're very emotionally invested, especially if it's a job you care about, right? It's easier said than done. For a normal, well-adjusted human being, it's hard to just have a thick skin and have it roll off your back completely, especially if you're in a situation where you need a job. Maybe you're out of work. Maybe you're between jobs. You got laid off. Then it's even harder to not take it personally. I agree with you. That's the attitude we should all have. We should realize what it is, for what it is. But that's easier said than done. We're getting a lot of people here. We got 41 people in the chat. Thank you for being here. I do appreciate it. Hopefully we'll be able to add some value here. Sear Phony says, I had an interview recently where the manager said, you say you're a good employee, but I see you were a temp for years at X company. I guess he wanted to know why I was a temp, but I was offended. Yeah, this is the other thing. If you're in a job interview type situation, depending on the interviewer you have, they feel it gives them license to ask you very direct, very cuttingly rude questions sometimes. Like direct to the point of not necessarily rudeness, but they're too personal and they're loaded. Like in this case, they're asking you about being a temp and they're asking about it in a very negative kind of way. and that's based on them making assumptions about you. And what you're doing here is you're getting a glimpse into the kind of thinking that these people are doing, the assumptions they're making, how they regard you. They're advertising it. That's why these are bad from an organizational point of view. I'm looking at this a lot of times from the point of view of the organization. If these people worked for me, I would take exception with a lot of these practices. Because these are contrary to what you want. I mean, I get that you save time and, sometimes, but it's not an excuse. It doesn't justify this kind of treatment of people. And the other thing that underscores all of this is that we are very ineffective at assessing people. Okay? So, I honestly don't care what anybody says. If you're a sort of lifelong HR expert, or you're a recruiter, or whatever you are with years of experience, and you're going to try and come back to me and say that these practices are justified, they're not. We've had management scientists studying this kind of thing for several decades. The numbers show that we are very ineffective at assessing people. So all these little things that they're doing, they can't even justify it by saying, oh yeah, at least I'm getting an accurate assessment on people. They're not. Okay? And like this, in this particular case, for Sear Phony, you have an interviewer that's asking you a very sort of direct question. You regard it as rude. You start to get defensive about it and upset. Okay? And they can justify it by saying, well, I'm cutting right to the issue. I want a very direct answer as to this concern that I have, right? Sometimes they have more indirect, abstract reasons for asking questions. They might say, I want to see how this person handles an interaction with somebody who's rude to them. Maybe it's in customer service. I want to see how they handle that. I want to try and get their back up, get them frustrated, and see how they respond. See how easy it is, and see how they handle it. And that has a certain logic, but unfortunately that doesn't work either, okay? Because a job interview is not a natural situation. It's not a substitute for being on the job. People are going to act completely different in a job interview than they will in the actual job. This is something that's well known. So all these little psychology 101 type tactics, they don't work. They don't. It doesn't reveal anything. It really doesn't. Yeah, I've had the temp comment thrown at me before too. Yes, it's like people, I mean, like I said, you're getting a glimpse into how they regard different things. If they think a temp is, in some way inferior, or you're an inferior quality candidate because you've had a temp job, I mean, that's silly. There's no correlation with that. I had a hiring manager be late 30 minutes for the virtual interview. I waited to see just how long they would be late for, and outright told them I was no longer interested in the position. Yeah. I'm still on the fence on whether I recommend that people sort of keep it real. As frustrating as it is, I mean, you don't want to do anything that could potentially come back to you. The one thing that they do in business and other circles is they ghost people. So, I wouldn't judge you too harshly if you ghosted them. It's a sort of classist mindset. Well, it's a very judgmental, ignorant mindset. And that's a window into their thinking. I mean, right there, okay? Right there, I can make some assumptions about this person who's responding in that way to you having worked a temp job. Okay? And they're not good. Someone says, can HR ask during job interviews what I'm doing in my current job, like specifically to describe my task? What do I tell them? Can I say it's a company secret? Listen, you can say whatever you want up to and including the legal limits of the law, okay? I would not recommend that because it's a red flag. Now, listen, if you go to a job interview, it is reasonable if they're going to ask you, if you currently are employed, what you do in your job. Okay? You need to be able to answer that without giving proprietary information or trade secrets or anything like that. You should be able to say, I work in this sort of area. I do this type of work. My work involves, number crunching most of the time, or interacting with people, or, just general guidelines. You can certainly do that. That's not yielding any kind of trade secret. It shouldn't be violating any kind of NDA or anything like that. You should be able to talk around stuff like that and still give a proper answer. Now, if they really probe you on specifics, like on technical details, you could say, well, unfortunately, I can't get into it because, that could be a trade secret. I know there's some IP concerns there, but listen, if you really do need that information, I can give you my boss's contact information, and you can try them and see if it's okay for them to give you that. And also, it can serve as a reference. GM says, do you have any advice on how to be prepared for technical questions, especially if one does not have experience related to some of the job duties? Well, you would do research if, listen, it depends what the details are, of course, is the answer to that. I mean, depending on, are you changing careers? Is this a job that you have no hard experience in? Is that what you're doing? If it is, you can try and relate it to things you do know about in your current career. Okay. Other than that, you would research, right? If you're applying to a role that you've never had before, it's not a career change, but it's just a slightly different role. You would presumably investigate what are the types of things you do in that role and be prepared to answer obvious stuff. Okay. For example, if you're going up for a sales type job and you've never been in sales before, they're probably going to ask you, how would you make a sale? How would you respond to a customer if they do this? Things like that. And to get the answers to those things, you can do research into that. You can go on the internet and you can at least, learn some of the theory behind this stuff. So if they do ask you that stuff, it shouldn't be a problem. We're getting into sort of a Q&A thing here. Listen, I'll take the next 4 questions and then I'm going to continue with the topic. How would you suggest answering what professionalism would you bring to the job? Oh, I hate those questions that are so general. You have no idea what they're asking. I do not understand the question, as I am a professional and licensed engineer. Hey, I have a degree in electrical engineering, and I feel the same way that you do. They think they're so clever asking these high-level, generalized questions. Listen, if they ask you an extremely general question, you give an extremely general answer. That's the general rule, okay? So if they say, what professionalism would you bring to the job? I would say, well, I'm a fully qualified engineer. I've got X many years experience under my belt. When I'm given a task, I complete it. I complete it on time. I complete it on budget. And if there are any issues, I bring those up early so that we can plan for them and address them correctly. And, that's how I operate. I make sure that things are done properly and professionally at all times. And I welcome feedback, but even if I don't receive feedback for my job, I'm known to be able to handle that stuff correctly. I mean, I don't know, something like that. It's very general, so you respond in kind, right? I finally got an interview last week for after hundreds of applications. We'll see how it went. Were those hundreds of applications for responding to internet jobs? because usually that's how it goes. The response rate when you're responding to posted jobs on the internet is notoriously low. If that's the only thing you are doing to find a job, and you're not just casually looking, but you're really engaged in a proper job search, I would recommend that you also investigate other ways of getting a job, because many other ways are actually much more productive. They're more efficient, and the chances of getting a good job go up when you use some of those other techniques. Okay? Check out my YouTube channel for more details. Let's see here. I have an interview coming up, and the person will show me around the town. Okay. If asked personal questions, will be an appropriate response. That is so general. I don't know if I can really answer that. If they ask personal, it depends what kind of personal question it is. There are certain questions that by law they're not allowed to ask. You can easily find out what those are. Go to Google, type in illegal questions, and then your region or country, and like illegal job interview questions. And, usually you can find some stuff there. Okay, but, I would be as forthcoming as possible as long as you are comfortable with it. Okay? But it would be good to know what questions are illegal. For example, they can't ask you your marital status. They can't ask you your religion. They can't ask you your age. There's certain things they're not allowed to ask. And it gets a bit more technical too. Sometimes they'll demand proof of your compensation for the last job you worked. And depending on where you are in the world, that can be illegal. They don't even have the right to even ask you that, let alone get an answer to it. So just bone up on those. Look those up. Make sure you're familiar with them. And if you're comfortable answering a personal questions like what's your favorite sports, that's fine. If they cross the line and they make you uncomfortable, a reasonable response is, well, that's quite a personal question, and I'd rather answer questions more pertinent to the role if that's all the same to you. Something like that. It's like a sort of innocent deflection. Okay. I'm going to sort of cut it off after this one here. I was told not to talk about kids, etc., because they might assume you will miss work, etc. Yes, like anything about your marital status or your common law status or your family setup, usually that's kind of not allowed. Okay. And yes, how many kids you have, that would fall under that category of inappropriate in most regions of the world, as I understand it. Okay. The assumption is that if you're a woman and you have kids, they may decide not to hire you because if they find there's a likelihood that you'll have more kids, they don't want you going off on maternity leave, all that kind of stuff. They're not allowed to ask that. Okay. But just to be sure, in your region, go and Google it. Okay. So that's great. We've done a bit of a Q&A session. I'll resume that again in a bit, but I wanted to talk about a few things. The theme of this, why job interviews are so bad. A lot of times people are commiserating on the live streams about some bad job interview experiences they've had. And I've done some videos in the past where I talked about job interview horror stories and just how unprofessional a lot of interviewers are actually behaving as a matter of course. And I got a sort of tidal wave of people sharing their bad interview experiences with me. And it's ridiculous. For example, probably the most obvious topic is ghosting. I'm sure everybody understands that. Ghosting, that's when, they just stop responding to you. They might say, yeah, I'll give you a call tomorrow. And then they don't. And then when you follow up, you can never get them on the phone again. They never respond to emails or anything. And you never hear back from them ever again. right? That's ghosting. They just disappear. Now, if you haven't experienced that, or you've experienced that for the first time, what you got to know is that apparently that's the norm. People act like this. If you're our friend, the engineer there, they may say things like, I'll get back to you. And then they give you some specifics. And they don't. It's a lie. They lied right to your face. There are not many situations in business in which you're dealing with a partner, somebody you want to work with, okay, where you do this to them and it's okay in the sense that there's no consequences, right? But apparently, a lot of job interviewers are allowed to get away with this. I think it's ridiculous, personally. If you're just starting out and you don't know this, this can be a real slap in the face, a real wake up when it does happen to you, because we feel so disrespected by this kind of behavior. And it isn't just limited to that. Okay. It isn't just limited to ghosting. How many times have you dealt with someone who either a recruiter or a hiring manager that they really signal to you that they're just not taking any of this seriously? You're not important to them. It's like they claim that, I will do this for you. I will send you the details. I'll send you an email or whatever. And they never do. Or they're so disorganized and it's so off the cuff that it's, once again, disrespectful. This is so prevalent these days, and I'm not sure why it is. I think it's a lot of times it's just pure unprofessionalism on the part of recruiters. They are getting used to being able to get away with this kind of behavior, and nobody's calling them on it. I'm not saying you should call them on it, but nobody's calling them on it. They're used to candidates ingratiating themselves to these people and nobody calling them on their unprofessional behavior. This is a real thing, and this has got a lot more prevalent in the last 30 years. And it's just ironic in the age where we care about protocol and communication skills, interpersonal skills more than we ever have in the past. We've really put emphasis on, these skills are important and doing the stuff right is very important. In this day and age, we've observed how in the practices of hiring, the ability to conform to that has just gone right down the tubes. So it's really ridiculous. And if that's happened to you, number one, you're not alone. Number two, this is the norm these days. And just like somebody said at the beginning of the chat, try and not take it personally. It's kind of hard sometimes. But just remember, you've got to expect this type of behavior now. So hopefully, if nothing else, it will help you to look out for number one when you're going through the hiring process. Okay, you do what's best for you. Okay, for example, if they say, we're really interested in you. We want you to come in and you're down to our finalists. We'd really like to talk to you and we're probably going to give you an offer, right? Don't stop looking for jobs when they say that. Don't stop applying to other places just because they say that. You do what's in your own best interest. Don't be fooled by this kind of these cheap tactics that they're using these days. How many times have you dealt with a recruiter where they don't seem to have basic IT skills? They can't operate a computer. They can't send an email properly. I got I don't know what year it was. I don't know, about around the year 2000. I remember somebody had to get back to me with some, a date and time and a place for a job interview. And how did they give me that information? They sent me an email with an attachment, and it was a Lotus 123 attachment. I mean, Lotus 123 is before my time. This is like early 1980s. I think people use that kind of stuff. It was a monumental effort for me to try and open that file. And in this Lotus 123 file, there was this is the address, this is the day, and this is the time. Just like, my God, people that can't master their own equipment. I don't know if that's ever happened to you. But that's my sort of little rant for today. The big elephant in the room, though, is that people that they just don't understand how to ease the tension. They don't know how to deal with somebody properly. The way this stuff works, if you don't know, I'm sure a lot of people do, but when you interact with somebody, okay, if you have advanced interpersonal skills, one of the things you do is you try and make that person feel like they're the most important person that you've dealt with that day, okay? That's how you want them to feel. You don't want them to feel that, they're unimportant to you. And when you look at what people do in sales and marketing, when people do, how people basically operate in almost every other department of an organization, they have this down. If you're meeting with customers, you're meeting with vendors, people know this. This is the MO of how you operate. But for some reason, these days, as soon as you're dealing with a candidate, you can treat them like dirt and it's okay. I just don't get that. And I know there's a lot of people out there, maybe some of you guys, that have gone through a lot of stress and a lot of emotional issues because it just amplifies the rejection. Especially if you're between jobs and you're in a very vulnerable place. You're not at your best. Money might be a concern. Self-confidence might be a concern. And then you get these people treating you like dirt. Right when you're down, they start kicking you. I think it's disgraceful. And what I have seen, by the way, is I've seen people that were rejected for jobs that develop an animosity towards that organization and they go and work for their competitors. And 10 years later, those people are in high positions at their competitors. And all of a sudden, that treatment that they dished out, so willingly to other people many years ago has come back to bite them in the ass. Pardon my French. Especially to our friend in France. And pardon my expression. As they say in France, I think it's pardon mon anglais, right? Anyway. Okay, so what do we got here? Now that I've gotten off my soapbox, hopefully that wasn't too boring, interminable, endless rant. Let's see. Okay, is that Sean? Is that how you say that? Says, hi, I did an interview to the last stage. I got a call later that they decided to promote a guy for the level. Thought I had a chance there. Yes, that is also something that's very common. They will post a position publicly when in reality, they've had an internal candidate in mind the entire time. And it was either a facade or if it was legitimate, what they were doing is they were just putting their toe in the water to see if there was anyone else more qualified. Like clearly more qualified. And the answer is always no, because you're comparing someone you know very well that you've worked with over many years, presumably, with strangers. Who are you going to assign more value to? It's going to be the person you're familiar with, right? That's just how it goes. It could be that. Or sometimes it's a political dog and pony show where they have to, by law, pretend that they're looking externally. So it's an objective thing. It's some kind of supposed checks against nepotism and things. And, but they're not doing it. They're doing it. They're going through the motions, but they're not actually doing it. So it's all a farce, basically. That's unfortunate. It could have been legitimate. Hopefully it was, but those other scenarios have been known. I've had interviews where the person conducting the interview just talks about themselves and their kids. That's awesome. I don't know how to control the interview to showcase my skills. You know what? Something I've said in the last few live streams, if anybody has been there, the job interview and the results of it are much more about them and their company than about you. Okay? Everyone should know that. Okay? Like, as evidenced by the fact that you go to one job interview and you don't get it. It goes rather poorly. You really don't impress them. They decide to pass on you. And then you go to another job interview and you basically give the same answers. You're the same person with the same background, same resume, et cetera, et cetera. And all of a sudden they think you're awesome and they hire you, right? I mean, what of all the variables, what's the factor that's changed? It's not you. It's them. You know, if you're going for a manager position and our friend the engineer is up for it, and the person interviewing is just biased against engineers, they're biased against technical people. They're not a technical person. They don't place value on technical people. What they want is a, salesperson or something like that. So no matter what you say, the deck's stacked against you. That's just how it goes. So I mean this in a good way. It's because the reason you didn't get it has nothing to do with you. It's to do with these people, their assumptions, their hangups, their biases, their stereotypes, and either as an individual and or as an organization. Yeah. Alexander says, HR says that they have two very good internal candidates for this position. Oh, that's wonderful. Where they tell you about other candidates. That's very professional. How does that make you feel when they tell you in your job interview, they start talking to you about other candidates, especially when they're complimenting them? Yeah. Remember what I said earlier about, social skills and communication skills, interaction skills, where you're supposed to make the person you're addressing feel like they are the most important person to you, right? That's how you want everyone to feel that interacts with you. And this is 180 degrees the opposite of that. So we're off to a great start. Okay, what are the chances to get hired in this situation? Not very good, to be honest with you. If hired, how to behave with those candidates who didn't get the job? Well, it's awkward, isn't it? They're putting you in an awkward situation. Like, for example, let's say you applied for a job with me and I decided to interview you for the job. And I get you in the room and I start talking to you about how wonderful the last guy was that I talked to, right? I mean, that's just totally unprofessional. I don't even understand the purpose of it. If their purpose is to make you feel awkward, and I mean, if it is thought out this much, which I doubt, the reasoning behind that is to get you to really sell yourself even harder because you feel like you're swimming uphill. Like, what an indirect way of doing it. I just don't understand why someone would do that. I think it's far more likely that they just don't have a clue what they're doing and shouldn't be in that position. I don't think it's a good chances to get hired. And how do you behave with the other candidates who didn't get the job? Well, if they didn't get the job and you did, I don't think, are you really going to be interacting with them? If you did get the job and everybody knows that you got the job and they didn't, you behave professionally. You just say, oh, it's very good to meet you. I'm sorry things didn't work out this time, but I'm sure that amazing opportunity is right around the corner and you might have had a lucky escape. I mean, I don't really see that situation arising too often, but that's how I would handle it if I was in it myself. Learner says, how can I get a job in IT industry after having a career gap of 12 years due to my family member's sickness? I am working as a self-employed tutor. Okay, here's the deal. I don't know about IT specifically with changing a career after a 12-year gap, but what I can say is that the way to change careers is not to apply for a posted job and not to do it blind. The short answer to change careers or any other special situation like this where you're coming back after a 12-year gap, the short answer is networking, okay? 75% of people who get jobs get it through networking, okay? Don't take my word on that. Go look it up and you'll see that's the truth. So you don't get the job by posting, by responding to a posted job ad. The other mechanical reason for this is that if you're going in with all the other applicants through a job posting, okay, they're judging you on your resume. Now, they tend to measure, recruiters in particular, tend to measure everything in terms of years of experience. Now, you are going to lose because of a 12-year work gap. You're going to be at a considerable disadvantage if their metric is years of experience, and that's all they care about. In addition, IT, your skills are regarded as going out of date a lot quicker than in other industries because IT moves a lot quicker. At least it used to. I don't know if it still does, but at least it used to. Okay? I mean, we're still using C and, all the basic stuff. I know it's changed, but not at the pace it used to. Anyway, the way you do it is you get the job through networking, okay? You create relationships with a bunch of hiring managers, and then you capitalize on those. I have a lot of videos on my YouTube channel about how to do that, okay? And it works because they're not hiring you based on your resume. They're hiring you based on who you are and what you've just demonstrated by approaching them, pitching yourself, and if there's been an interaction back and forth, you've demonstrated your professionalism, and presumably they like you, and because of it. So that's what they're judging you on, not your resume. And that's how you get those jobs. That's how people do career changes. You can't really change careers by responding to a posted job, going in and interviewing it like you would any other candidate, because the experience you have in this industry is going to be zero because you're changing careers. You have experience, but it's in another industry, so they regard that as being impractical and irrelevant. In fact, they can even regard it as negative because it's things that you've done instead of working in this industry. We all know that's ridiculous. And in the real world, it doesn't work like that. But this is how recruiters think. Why do you want to change after serving 10 years in your current organization? I know that's not directed at me, but I can think of many reasons why somebody would. Just as organizations rise and fall, industries rise and fall, and this is continually happening, and people keep readjusting. So that happens quite often. The mighty Fifi. The mighty Fifi. Wow. That's awesome. I'm thinking of an extremely muscular 10-foot tall poodle, but that's just me. I should maybe see a doctor about that. Okay, you have tips for interviews with people that are very impersonal and robotic. The atmosphere made me not perform as well as normal, and I have not heard back. Okay, well, I'm sorry to hear that, the mighty Fifi. True. Okay. Luckily, I have not experienced that because before I graduated, I had been employed. Maybe down the road, I will get interviewed. Not experienced that because before I graduated. Okay. Todd Miller. Does having a defunct school you graduated from listed on your resume hurt your opportunities? I don't think so. I mean, listen, it will to some people, but it shouldn't. Okay? Provided you have an explanation that can be verified if ever they ask you about it. I don't see why that would be a problem. Okay? Now, if it's defunct, but it has disappeared from, like, say, the internet, and there's no mention of it anywhere, that could be a challenge, okay? So you would have to have some kind of backup available if anyone asked you about that. That's what I would say to that. And where are we here? I just want to respond to the mighty Fifi. Just, if you're claiming that my responses are impersonal and robotic, I'm not sure whose videos or whose advice you've been listening to, but like mine are precisely the opposite of saying a script. Generally I recommend the types of answers or the format that your answer will take, but the details are up to you. I don't recommend and never have recommended anyone say a script in response to a question, because if you're doing anything other than entry-level jobs, that's a kind of a red flag. Giving an impersonal script that like anybody could say for any job that's above the entry level, generally that doesn't work at all. So, so I don't recommend people giving impersonal and robotic answers. Yeah. But no, this is all part of the theme. So we've talked about a lot of kind of problems with job interviews. And I'm interested to hear if anyone has their own experience behind this. If you have, your experience that you've had with a bad job interview, it was absolutely terrible, they made you feel absolutely terrible, completely unnecessarily. This happens quite often. And if this is happening to you, my purpose in doing these live streams is also to make you aware that there's nothing wrong with you, because we can easily leave with that impression. We tend to think that, okay, if the interview went horribly, then there's got to be something wrong with us. We're not qualified, or, we're being overly ambitious and we're shooting for something out of our league. Now, it is possible to do that, but a lot of times we're not, as evidenced by people's career paths. I want you to know that you shouldn't have that as a takeaway, okay? A lot of times it's because people don't know how to interview, and they're disguising the fact that in HR, like I said, we have known for a very long time that interviewing as a science, as a social science, is actually quite ineffective. A lot of people know this. You probably have a feeling about this, but they've known this. And if you don't believe me on this, go talk to people that have PhDs that work in business, but specifically in human resources. And, they're the ones that are sort of pushing human knowledge forward. They're the ones studying the effectiveness of business practices and testing with data theories on how to improve them. And they will tell you, the uncertainty around job interviews is extremely high. Okay, here we are. I forget where I left off here. What are you bringing on board as senior management role? Okay, is that a question? Well, once again, if that's a question they're asking you and you're wondering how to answer it, that's a very general answer to that. Ahmed, I had an interview and I reached to the last stage and I received acceptance mail. Now is 1 month and I didn't get the offer letter. What could be the reason for the delay? Well, you're not going to like this, but the most likely reason is that they went with somebody else. I know that they said that, they gave you the acceptance letter, so that would tend to think that an offer is forthcoming. But if you waited a month and it isn't there, now the obvious question is, have you followed up? Okay, if you wait say 3 or 4 days or maybe a week, depending on what it is, and you haven't heard anything, and they've told you you're going to get something, follow up. Just say, hello, I'm following up to see if there was any progress on this. Just wondering what the status is, and let them talk. And if you can't reach them, try again. And if you can't reach them, try again. After the third attempt, it's usually, unfortunately, not worth your time to go beyond that. The mighty Fifi, I'll clarify. I just interviewed a job with people who were not personable, and it made me uncomfortable during the interview, which made me not do well. Do you have tips for overcoming that? Well, it's not really tips. It's just sort of knowledge, okay? First of all, like I've said, to get good at interviewing, you have to do a lot of interviews, okay? Practice makes perfect. And the more experience you have with that type of situation, okay, the better you will do. Now, there are other things that can help. Some people, they practice public speaking. Some people, they join debate clubs and things like this. Those can all help, okay? So that will help with it. But ultimately, the more interviews you do, the more you know what to expect, and the more you see, and the better prepared you are, okay? Listen, this is something that you just learn by doing, okay? Feeling comfortable is something that you will get better at over time. People generally tend to get more self-confidence with age, okay, generally speaking. And but the thing is, if somebody's really rude to you, and somebody is either intentionally or unintentionally, they're trying to stress you out and make you feel uncomfortable, okay? It's not a problem when you then feel uncomfortable, okay? That shows you're a normal human being. If somebody really tries to stress you out and make you feel bad and you don't feel anything, that's actually not a normal response, okay? I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but I mean, we're just not wired like that, okay? We all have human failings. We are not superhuman, and we can't disconnect our emotions and our brains from whatever situation we're in. We just can't, okay? What you can do is you can, to a degree, have control over how you respond, okay? And there are techniques for that. For example, if somebody asks you a really uncomfortable question, a sort of blanket response you can say is, so why would you ask me that? If it's a really rude, inappropriate question that, it's very hostile, things like that, that's an instant way to turn any question around on the person asking it. If they ask you something really offensive, the way to turn it around is just to say, why would you ask me that? Okay. I mean, there's all kinds of tips. You can learn all that kind of stuff that may help. But listen, the bottom line is that if the interview has clearly gone south like that, it's probably not worth continuing. If it clearly has failed, you feel terrible, you're starting to feel anger, you feel like, even if they offered you the job, you would not work for these people. If that's how you feel, just end it, and end it politely, and say, well, listen, I don't feel that I'm really the right candidate for this. Thank you very much for your time. And then, you could say, I withdraw my application, something like that, and then just leave, But we want to avoid that unless it's really taking it to that level. We want to give it every chance. Also, tips for dealing with interview with multiple people at once. There's no tips for dealing with multiple people at once. The panel interview, it's the same thing as the regular interview, except the question comes from multiple people. The only added thing you have to do is, if you know who's going to be at the interview, and it's possible to look them up on things like LinkedIn, you have more work to do. Excuse me for 1 second. That's a lot of talking. Fortunately, I have my trusty Red Bull, so I can talk for hours up until the point where my brain explodes. So when you go to a panel interview, if you have been given the information that who's going to be there, well, one thing you can do is to sort of learn who the people are. For example, you go and you know that this person is a recruiter, so therefore they care about how closely you meet requirements. This other person is the hiring manager. Therefore, they will care most about if they like you and you click with them as a person. Whereas this other person is maybe the big boss, and they're there just to see that you have, the right attitude and the right values to work at that organization. Okay? So knowing who the people are enables you to tailor your answers depending on who's asking it. And you would know, presumably, what they care about. If you know this fourth person is like the technical authority, they're either going to be a peer of yours or they are an engineer by training, then, you would know that they're going to care about a correct technical answer. Right? So that's the only extra work you have to do for a panel interview. In every other respect, it's the same as a one-on-one face-to-face interview with an interviewer. There's no real other difference. Other than you might find it a little more intimidating, but it really shouldn't be, I've been in panel interviews with 6 people. I mean, I know you can do more, but I mean, I've had that. And trying to keep straight who is asking a question and who they are, and what maybe perspective that they care about, that's kind of hard to keep straight in your head. What I have done in the past is, if you have a business card, I would start giving my business card to these people, and they respond by giving me theirs. That's kind of, when someone gives you a card, if you have a card, you kind of automatically give them yours. So if you have people's business cards and it says like recruiter, manager, vice president, like head of engineering, something like that, that helps you. And if you can put these on the table in front of you, that can help keep it straight in your head. What happens when a panelist tries to translate your response to a particular trait? For example, I can see he is self-centered. Well, if they said that to your face, that would probably be a big red flag for me. Unless they were intentionally trying to get a rise out of you. If that happens once, don't show any frustration or any kind of, that you take exception to it. I mean, if somebody said that to me, my response might be like, well, I could perhaps see how you might come to that conclusion, but I assure you it's because of this. This is the mechanism going on here. I'm concerned about this, because if that is not in place, it can have this negative effect. So it's not that I'm caring about myself. It's mainly for that purpose. Something like that. If that keeps happening, then that's a real red flag. Like, for example, if you interviewed with somebody and they said, tell me about yourself. And you said, well, I've got a few years experience and I've done this and I like to do this. And they said, okay, well, you're clearly a jackass. I mean, how would you respond? There is no proper response to that, We're conditioned to think that no matter what they do, it's, there's a response to it where we could still, get chosen. I told you. Always remember, whether you pass or fail, it's much more dependent on them than it is you. Okay? And if they've decided based on some ridiculous assumption that, you're this or you're that, I mean, how would these people know if you're self-centered? They've spoken with you for what, 15 minutes before they say this to you? How would they know? It's so arrogant to even presume to make assumptions about people after half a job interview with them. Not to mention the fact that a lot of times you get to the interview and these people might have maybe read your resume weeks ago, but they certainly haven't read it recently, and they know nothing about you when you sit down for the interview. Nothing at all. They don't even remember your name if they hadn't read it on the resume in front of you. That's also becoming the norm. That's half the reason they ask, tell me about yourself, or please introduce yourself, because they've forgotten who you are. They read your resume weeks ago and they haven't looked at it since then. So while you're talking, they're kind of They got their resume in front. They're kind of going down it, right? To remember who you even are, So don't feel intimidated, okay, by these people. A lot of them don't have their act together, and this is reflected in their hiring choices. If the recruiter asks me about what do you do in your off times, what do they expect from your answer? They're trying to employ Psychology 101 in what they feel is a very clever way to learn who you are. For example, are you an introvert? You like to go home and just read books and watch TV and get on the internet? Or are you an extrovert? You like to have a big, get together and have all your friends and neighbors over and, be the life of the group. They're trying to gather this stuff. Okay. Now, I'm sure you can go on the internet and sort of Google this and find some recruiter who has given you like a very strategic answer to something like that. The reality is that, in my opinion, you can't prepare for every possible question under the sun, especially if they're going to ask you about things outside the job. It's just not possible to memorize a strategic answer for every single possible question, so knowing what you know about the requirements for the job, okay, if it is possible for you to think on your feet in that moment and give an answer that's consistent with what you know they're looking for, okay? So for example, if they're looking for a salesperson, okay, they're probably not going to like it if you say, well, after work, I like to just be by myself. There's a lot of noise and activity at work. And when I get home, I just want to be by myself, read a book, spend some quality time on the internet or, in front of the TV. That probably would not be what they want to hear for a sales role. Okay? Don't say things like, I work on a side hustle or something like that. Like there might be a few technical things you want to steer away from, but, just look, that's a question you can't prepare for. The guideline for how to answer is what the requirements of the job are. Okay? There's going to be stated requirements and unstated requirements. The stated requirements are in the job posting. Okay? The unstated requirements are going to be things like soft skills, okay? So for example, if you're up for a sales job, you need to be charismatic, you need to be outgoing, you need to be an extrovert, you need to like being around a lot of people. That doesn't bother you, okay? And that sort of thing, okay? Just take your best shot when it comes to those, but that's all you can do. Okay, someone says, I had an interview in Yamaha in Russia, and they asked me to describe my working experience, but in English. So I failed that time because of poor English skills. That was embarrassing. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. Hopefully if there are language requirements, hopefully they've made you aware of that before the interview. But if they just spring it on you, what can you do? It's just, that's bad. That's a recruiter doing a bad job, okay? Because look, if a requirement of the job is that you have to speak English well, and they haven't told you this, what do you like? Why would they bring you in for the interview? You go all the way down there to do a job interview just to find out that you don't have one of the technical requirements because they didn't state it. That's just disorganization and unprofessionalism, is what that is. Akshay Verma says, Sir, I am a huge fan. Love from India. Thank you very much, Ashkay. That's very nice of you to say. That also brightens my day. And thank you for being here. Is there a best practice for translating military experience to civilian experience? I find a lot of my experience may be extreme to people not accustomed to the military. In all honesty, I'm not the best person to answer that because I've never been in the military myself. Listen, I think a big thing you can do is if there's like differences in lingo. Okay. So usually what we see is if you work in a certain industry, okay, that industry will have its own lingo. Okay. Sometimes organizations have their own lingo. So within an industry, if you work for a particular company, they will have their own terms for, parts, objects, tasks, roles, processes. They will have their own sort of company-specific lingo for that. Now, what happens is if you've been working at that company your entire career and you do an interview with another company, you're going to start describing things in that job interview using your own company's lingo that these people don't know, like its own lexicon. Okay? Now, I'm given to understand that the military is like that to a degree. Okay? I'm sure it depends on a bunch of factors, but that's the most obvious thing, that when someone starts talking to you, within a minute, they can tell, you have certain experiences, but if you're using a lingo that they don't understand, it makes you seem inaccessible, like, you're talking about something else. Really, you could be talking about exactly what they're talking about, but they don't recognize it because you're using your own lingo. You're using the military lingo. That's how they described it. You see that with people that work in like the police force and things like that. They come out of it and they have a particular lingo. So that can be like a sort of barrier right off the hop before you even talk about skills and culture or anything like that. That's a very immediate thing. So just be aware of that. And if other people have a different lingo in a different industry outside the military, just see if you can sort of speak in their terms. That's all I could say. But it would probably be more productive talking to somebody that has experience coming out of the military and working in the civilian, like in the private sector or in the government, wherever you're going, and they may be a great resource to you. I have cleared, M Channel says, I have cleared all the stages and got an offer by HR, but the offer, I believe, needs some enhancements. Initially, HR said that's a hard stop, but later they said they'll come back, but no response yet. Well, listen, if they don't come back with a response, it's academic, isn't it? If they do come back with a response, then they're going to say that they can't budge on a lot of things. That's just their position. Sometimes it's true. A lot of times it isn't, okay? It depends on the circumstances. Okay, but the point is that you can't try and negotiate until they've given you an offer letter. That's a fact. If you do, they'll just go with somebody else. So after you get an offer letter, if that ends up happening, then you have the option of sort of saying like, okay, look, this is fine. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'd love to work here. This is fine. That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. But I'm going to need this to change to this. If you can do that, you got a deal. Let me know when you want me to start. Something like that. Okay. Now, the next live stream I do, by the way, is going to be all about salary. So hold your salary questions, because this is supposed to be more of the emotional kind of job search rejection experience discussion today. The next one I do, which will probably be on Wednesday, that's going to be all about salary, all about compensation in the hiring process. Love from India, love from Canada. Thank you for being here. Sir, how common is it for the Big Four to drop candidature after selection mail? I had this experience with Deloitte and they kept delaying me for 6 months. Wouldn't wish to give any interview there again. Look, the Big Four, I've never worked for the Big Four. I've hired people from the Big Four to do various auditing things, but I've never worked for them. As far as I know, they operate like any, large organization, global large organization. They're very formal and they care very much about efficiency, and their hiring practices, as far as I know, are typical of, global multinational corporations. By which I mean that they don't do a particularly good job, as far as I know, about as good as everybody else, which is not that great. For example, assessing your value based on years of experience. Yes, years of experience are a factor, but solely using that metric to see how good you are is ineffective. It's incorrect. So it is common. I mean, they'll engage in all those practices that we talked about, ghosting, things like this, ridiculous interviews that, engage in theory that we know doesn't work, like a lot of these psychological interviews. Okay. Those types of organizations, they tend to be very traditional, so they will respect if you have experience working in a recognized function in a recognized company. Okay, so they will respect that. Probably disproportionately. But, I mean, that's not something you really have control over. You don't have control over your work history. It is what it is. It's just a matter of, do they value it or not? Okay. For stuff like that, I mean, I would still try networking. Instead of applying for a job and going in with the standard, the standard HR process for recruitment and selection, where you go through applicant tracking software and then talk to a recruiter and then possibly talk to a hiring manager. I would not necessarily go down that road with them if you feel that you don't have a strong resume from their point of view. Okay, I would try the networking thing too, because that can be very effective. And what will happen is that if you do the networking thing and you contact somebody like a hiring manager high up, okay, there's a chance they can refer you downwards to like a hiring manager, and they will consider you very strongly. Okay, they will not consider you a throwaway candidate. They will actually look at you quite seriously because you were referred to them by their boss. Okay, they're still going to go through, the standard hiring practices for HR, but they're going to do it from the point of view that you are a serious candidate. So they're not going to dismiss you for like a silly, trivial reason. Somebody says, in one interview, no one had their camera on. I felt acquired being the only one on camera. Yeah, once again, that's a matter of common courtesy. If you're doing a remote interview, what they're doing is they're doing what's easiest, which is you turn your camera off. And then you don't have to be there. You don't have to be listening. You don't even have to, I mean, depending on details, they might not even have to appear presentable. Right? But once again, if you are interviewing with a professional company, with professional individuals, people that you would want to work for, they will do things like turning on their camera if you have your camera on, especially if they require you to have your camera on. And, you don't want to turn yours off because that could send, a negative signal. So if you have yours on, they should respond in kind if they're professional. These people are not professional. Period. So, I mean, that's how this stuff goes. And, I just want to say, like, when people are starting out, when you're coming out of school or you're entering the workforce, you think that your qualifications and your experience, that alone qualifies you to get a job. And that's how it should work. But that's not how it works. As you guys probably know from your experiences, you also have to learn how to pass a job interview. So you could be a very talented, very qualified person. You could be a great employee. You could be young, you could have a lot of energy, a lot of enthusiasm, and maybe you're very professional too. Okay, you understand protocol, you have soft skills, you have people skills, okay, communication skills, things like this. And you may have all of that, but that alone is not enough to get you the job, unfortunately, if you're going through these formalized cookie cutter job interviews. You have to learn how to pass an interview. It's ridiculous. That's why I do videos on, how to answer some of the sillier questions that they're going to ask. Like, tell me about yourself. Like, it's just so artificial and stupid. And I feel for a lot of technical people in particular, like our engineer friend there, you may have been working very hard for years to get a degree or an educational qualification of some kind. You've worked very hard for it, and it really demonstrates your abilities. And then on top of that, you may have had some experience working in an internship or, in an entry-level job right out of school. And there you learned the practical side of doing your job. You learned how to deal with other people in a professional situation, etc. And after all that, you go to a job interview where they ask you, tell me about yourself. What's your weakness? What hobbies do you have? And, why do you think you're qualified? And then that's it. Do you have any questions for us? And based on them asking you those questions, they're going to reject you. You're not suitable. It's ridiculous. And for all the people that are faced with that situation, I would say, look, it is ridiculous. You know it. I know it. Most people know it. These people don't know it. And would you want to work for their organization? If they're the gatekeepers allowing only certain people into the organization, what kind of people are in there working? All indications are that they're not great people. So don't feel too bad about failing their little litmus test. And this is quite common, especially with recruiters. Recruiters, I'm not beating up on them, but their job is to find qualified candidates. Now, if they're then put in charge of making a final decision of who to hire, how would they be able to make that determination? They are trained in the business of finding candidates and organizing job interviews and asking cookie cutter questions. How would they know who would be best qualified for a technical position? They wouldn't. It's just that simple. That's why they use metrics like years of experience, because they don't know. And it gives them a system to at least make a determination. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of organizations, they fail, or they're ineffective. The part of it that I see, as sort of being a little bit higher up is, by the time that happens, it's too late because you've just populated your organization with people that have the wrong qualities. Maybe for years, you've been screening out people that have actual creative and innovative abilities in favor of time-serving, procedure-based people. And, you can't develop a new product that's competitive. And by the time you realize this, you can't turn that ship. I've seen this. I've seen this across multiple industries. Which one did I leave off here? Let's see. I had one interview. No one had their camera on. Yeah. I had a recommendation from a higher up, and still HR played politics and didn't offer me the job. Yes. Yeah. There's a lot of politics, unfortunately, in business, in anything that involves power. Okay. And yes, that is a role. And depending on your situation, you may have to learn that game, or it might not be necessary, depending on where you are. I meant to say I felt awkward. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of that, unfortunately. Listen, I want you to remember something. If I was going to give advice and someone came to me and said, what should I do or how should I regard being rejected for a job or being ghosted? I would say, look, if these people employ ridiculous criteria to assess you, things that are just so out to lunch, like it's clear they don't know what they're doing, okay? And they reject you based on that kind of idiotic assessment, it's not a place you'd have wanted to work anyway. It's disappointing because this looked like a good job. And so you applied for it and you're hopeful that you get it. And then it doesn't work out. And that's disappointing. And it's hard to feel good about it. You're not going to feel good, but it may be some consolation to know that, like, look, if that's how they honestly assess people, okay, that's not a place you want to work. It turns out that job that you thought was really good, it turns out it wasn't actually a good job. Because even if you got it, if that's the values that they have at that organization, you wouldn't have blossomed. You wouldn't have been a success working within that sort of value system. If they only respect people that serve time and they don't respect results or accomplishments, that may not be a good thing. If they only respect people who follow the rules and don't actually think for themselves, that may not be, a place where you would shine, possibly, right? So you got to keep this in mind. A lot of times we're looking at jobs that are posted publicly. Those tend to not be the best jobs, okay? The best jobs are not posted publicly. They're in the hidden job market. That's because they're highly desirable and, they already have people in mind, people that they want to trust, people that they want to have some kind of personal recommendation. Okay? And remember, when I say networking, I don't mean you need to know 1 million people. I mean, you can get the job. You just have to go about it in a different way. Okay? The way it works is that if a manager realizes they have to hire someone, okay? They're running an operation, they realize, like, look, we just can't do all this work. We need at least one more person. Okay? So that job exists. It exists in the mind of a manager. If you showed up and said, "Hello, Mr. Manager, just so you know, I have this qualification, this education, this experience. I'm looking for work right now, and I'm great at this, and I'm an awesome person to work with." If you hypothetically showed up right then and said that to the manager, they'd be like, I might have something for you. Let's talk, right? And right then, you'd have no competition for that job, right? And you have the additional advantage of that you're speaking to the manager. They've got a personal impression of you. You're not just a resume. You're not just an applicant. You're someone they've met. And you're someone that, through your own initiative, you reached out to them. So it feels like a referral and not like they're hiring you. You know what I'm saying? It feels like they invited you in. That's how it feels. Okay, so that's the hidden job market. So if you put out enough feelers with hiring managers, people high up in organizations, and you say, like, hey, I've got these skills, I've got this experience, I would love to work at your organization because I know that you guys do some really interesting work in this area and, blah, 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 things like this. There's many ways of doing it. And they have someone that's looking for someone with your talents. Before it even gets posted, they'll be talking to you. They won't post it if they talk to you and you work out. They save on all the work of writing a job description, hiring a recruiter, whether it's internal or external, doing things like job interviews, background checks, checking references, like all of that. They save on all the expense and effort of doing all of that. If you show up right in front of them and you're capable of doing it and they already know you. before this job was even mentioned, right? So that's networking, and that's the hidden job market. Now, there's a little bit more to it, but that's the basic idea, okay? So if you're only looking in the posted job market, you're competing with most other people for about 20% of all the jobs that are actually out there. The other 80% are not posted. Okay? So this is why I said at the beginning of the live stream, if you're only applying to posted jobs, there are other techniques that work really, really well. Okay? So you research it. Okay? Don't take my word. If this is all new, don't take my word for any of this. Go and do your own research. You will see that this is true. And there's ways of breaking in. I've done some videos. I also have a course, by the way, called Get Hired. So if you want sort of the whole thing from beginning to end, all laid out in a step-by-step process with scripts and things like this, consider checking that out. There's a link in the description of this video if you are interested. But yeah, look into this stuff. Okay. The only time a job is posted is if three things have been done first. Okay. Number one, the hiring manager just doesn't know anyone personally that could do the job. Okay. If they know someone, then usually they'll go to that person first. Okay. So if they don't know anyone, then they go to step two. Step two is, they will look for an internal candidate. Is there someone that we can promote up or sideways into the role? Because that would be even better than going to the public, because at least this person, we know them. They're a known quantity. We trust them. They've been working here for years. We know they're a good person. We know they're not crazy, or they're a criminal, or they're a kleptomaniac, or they're lying through their teeth about their qualifications. An internal candidate is less risky. So if there is one, that's what we would try first a lot of times, okay? Now let's say there is no internal candidate, okay? So then they go to step three. Step three is they go to HR and they say, look, in your files, do you have any resumes, say in the last couple of months, that people have applied for a job here? Of those resumes that you keep on file, do any of them have these qualifications that we're looking for? Now, maybe someone does. There is a resume. Someone applied for a job. They might not have gotten it, but it was recent. So we're going to call them up and say, hey, are you interested in this other position? Right? Now, if that also turns up nothing, okay, those three things have failed. Only then do they post the job publicly. That's how these things work. Okay? So the jobs that you see that are posted publicly, they're the ones that they couldn't fill through these other methods, these other superior methods. Okay, that's usually how this stuff works. So don't just be looking there. The other thing is that you have much, much stiffer competition if you're applying for a posted job. If you're looking for jobs in the hidden job market, you won't be going up against 200 other people. You're going up against maybe one or two. So already your odds go up. And if you get those jobs, that tends to be a better job because your boss hired you because they liked you and they thought you did a great job, instead of just picking one of these candidates, right? So check that out. If this is all new to you, do your own research. Check that out. I've got some videos. Other people have some videos. I mean, I can't vouch for how good they are, but I mean, it's very easy to verify some of the basics of this. The interviewer already has everything about us on the resume and still asks those generic questions instead of specific. Yeah, you know why? Because they haven't read your resume. Something like 80 to 90% of the time, they haven't read your resume. They might have glanced at it days or weeks ago when they sort of scheduled the job interviews, but not since then. So when you get to the interview, a lot of times they don't have a clue who you are. So they've got to reestablish it from scratch. It's a wonderful experience. It makes people feel great too. Yeah, as evidenced by the ridiculous questions they ask. I mean, you could have a PhD, 20 years of field work. You could have written books on a topic. You know, you could have pushed the boundaries of human knowledge forward on a specific topic, and they'll still ask you idiotic things like, so tell me about yourself. Why should we hire you? You know? Ridiculous. Saney says, as said, Robert, do not work for money, just work for learning. If the company where you are working, you have reached the point where you have learned good enough, just quit. Well, that sounds nice. I think some people do need to work for money too. That's kind of how most people have to operate, unfortunately. It would be nice if it did work like that for everyone. I applied for a department while currently employed. The other person, that's a good situation to be in. You're still working, but you're applying for a job. I applied for a department while currently employed. The other person who interviewed had a DUI 2 years earlier. That's driving under the influence, right? I think it's an American thing. And were laid off from 2 jobs. They got hired. I didn't. Yeah, so what does this tell you? It would be interesting to find out what went on behind the scenes that led to that. I received an email from a company recruiter that I have progressed to the next stage to meet with senior managers. I accepted. 6 months later, she then emails me if I was still interested. Yeah, I know. That's wonderful. You know what you should do? This is what I recommend. If you know their phone number, it's a she. Call her up. And then, just say like, oh, this is, whatever calling, I was responding. And then laugh hysterically for a minute solid and slam the phone down. That's probably, something that needs to be done. And then film the whole thing and post it on YouTube. And it will be very satisfying for a lot of people. Super Tap 007. Awesome. No, it's ridiculous, isn't it? I mean, there's so many things like this. It's like shooting fish in a barrel. You ask people for their bad job interview experiences, and there's like such ridiculous crap, that people have been through. And what I find unfortunate, especially, is that then, despite treatment like this, you have to be professional and not say anything, not mention it, act like you're not offended, act like everything is fine and you're just happy to have been considered. Like, look, there are some really great HR people out there. A lot of them work in executive search, true executive search, where they're hiring executives, they're hiring managers. I mean, these people, they know what they're doing. As well as you can assess somebody, a lot of them can assess people well as is possible to do it. They also have the interpersonal skills down. They treat people well. They don't ghost them. If you don't get the job, you can actually ask these people, can I ask, like, what was the issue? And they'll tell you, and you'll go, oh. I think I did a video about that a couple of years ago where I described precisely that experience. I was up for a CEO job several years ago, and I didn't get it. I got to the last round, but I didn't get it. It was like multiple rounds and like an insane amount of checks and things. And I didn't get it in the final round. And I'd asked there was a client, and then there was their glorified recruiter. And I said, why? Oh, I'm just wondering, was there a reason for it? And they told me. And they told me in a very polite, nice way. And what they told me made perfect sense. It was something like, look, you have this. Great. Like, that's all wonderful, especially this. One of the requirements, however, was that whoever they got had a very big Rolodex of people in that industry that they could call on, and to the best of what I could find, you don't have that. So unfortunately, and I said, like, yeah, you're absolutely right. I don't have that. And things like this. I mean, you get that kind of treatment. That's how good they do things. It's such a far cry from what, most people encounter. But I assure you, I've had this stuff happen to me too. You can probably tell by with a chip on my shoulder that I have here. Where are we here? Mr. D. That's awesome. Mr. T. I pity the fool. One big company wanted to hire me. I passed all the 4 stages of technical interviews, but my German skills was average, and told me that wasn't an issue, but after that, they just disappeared. Yeah. It's like, that's another thing. It also appears very cowardly. Now, I understand the mechanical reasons for it, for like lying to you like this. They'll never tell you the reason why they reject you in 99.9% of all situations. But what I find kind of annoying is they will lie right to your face and deflect it, or just give you blatantly false information and then ghost you. It's a very cowardly thing. It's a very unprofessional thing. I mean, really, it honestly doesn't take that much to say to somebody, look, I would have loved to hire you, but there's a certain mechanical requirement that, we just can't get past. And, it's a language barrier, or it's this, or it's that. And, now look, sometimes you can't do that because people get very emotional, they get very defensive, but if it's a professional situation, you're dealing with professionals, there's absolutely no reason why you can't do that. You just need social skills to pull it off, and a lot of these people don't have it. I have learned not to trust verbal offers. Yes, you are a wise individual, sword fighter. Because of them, I made plans for the future when I shouldn't have. Yeah, unfortunately, that's the kind of the lesson, isn't it? Look, you are not alone. I mean, that's the thing. This is done quite often. They will say whatever they have to say to get themselves some advantage. So if they're actually interested in you and they want to sort of put you on hold and try and ensure they don't lose you while they do something else, they'll say all kinds of stuff like this. And being, the sort of younger, gullible, trusting person, you'll take what they're saying at face value, and then you find out that you lose because of it. They're lying to you, So therefore, what message does this send? It means that you have permission to do everything you need to do that's in your best interest, because these people have no loyalty to you and they have no scruples. So, this is why when people say, if you're in a job interview and they ask you, are you interviewing anywhere else, or are you looking, are you pursuing any other job opportunities? When they ask you these types of questions, you have no obligation to answer them truthfully, because you see the kind of behavior that they do to you when the tables are turned. They're not forthright with you. They're not acting professionally. They're lying right to your face if it can get them a certain advantage. So they should not expect candidates to return to act any other way. You say, no, I'm not interviewing anywhere. Or you say yes if you want them to think that, or you say no if you don't want them to think that. That's fine. It's not a deposition. It's not a court of law. And they don't have the right to demand an answer to any question they ask. That's the other illusion, right? They'll ask some very pointed, direct questions at you about things you may not wish to disclose on the grounds that it gives a bad impression of you, right? They'll say things like, why did you leave your last, company? Let's say you were fired. This is a common one. You don't have to disclose that. You don't. I mean, look, I can't speak for the laws of every country in the world, but everyone that I know of, that's the reality. You don't owe them honesty on like everything. that's the reality you're up against. They think that by asking these questions, they can determine if you are going to work out as a candidate. And as I said, these things have nothing to do with it. Let's say you were fired in your last job. Let's say you had the misfortune of working for a terrible company that was abusive to its employees. It was extremely poorly run. You were the one person that, tried to do things properly, and you cared about your work. And because you put your integrity above the immediate needs of your boss or something, they fired you, right? It was an ego decision. Now, does that have any bearing on whether you're a good employee or not? No, of course it doesn't. It actually might demonstrate that you have integrity, right? So if they're going to use silly things like this to judge you and say, oh, you won't be a good employee for this company, it's ridiculous. And they ask you a pointed question, why did you leave your last company? You don't have to disclose it. You don't. I don't care what anybody says, And the other thing is they can't look this stuff up either, okay? Now, look, I'm not saying you should go and be disingenuous or you should, lie, about things. That's not what I'm saying. All I am saying is that they don't have an automatic right to an answer to anything they ask. That is an illusion, okay? And they take advantage of this, especially with young people, to ask you all kinds of things that they have no business asking. And that you wouldn't give an answer to if you knew what was really going on at their end. Hey, I got a super chat. William Reynolds. Thank you, William, for $5. I'm a William too. We have to stick together. And, I feel a commonality with you. I got a job about a week ago after a bunch of interviews. I had a bunch of offers and was lucky enough to be picky. Your videos helped a lot. Thanks. Oh, well, thank you very much. I'm glad that they helped. But you're obviously a very capable, valuable person, and they saw that. So congratulations. So thank you very much. Elsa says, I never know what to answer when they ask about other interviews. Look, there's many schools of thought on why they ask that question and whether it's good or bad to say yes or no. Depending on who you're talking to, they may have a certain mechanism for how they judge that. For example, if they ask, are you interviewing with anyone else? And you say yes. Okay. Some people can interpret that as, oh, this candidate is in high demand. Therefore, they must be good. Therefore, we should pick them, right? Other times, if they ask you the same question, are you interviewing with anyone else? And you say yes, they will interpret that as like, oh, okay, well, that means if I want to get you, I have to hurry up. I got to streamline my process. I might only have a tiny little window to finish my assessment of you and do any background checks, et cetera, before you're snapped off by somebody else. Why would I do that? Why would I focus on you and put all this work into you if you're probably going to accept some other offer before I even get to the end of the process, right? So it can go both ways. There's different mechanisms. If I didn't know anything, I would recommend you say no. It just simplifies things. But once again, that could backfire if people think about it a certain way. But listen, you're getting into like a situation where you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. So I err on the side of simplify and, or just be honest. Either of those would work. I don't think it matters a lot. That's not one of the most important job interview questions. That's kind of a footnote. They're far more likely to hire you if they like you. That's number one. Number two is if you meet the requirements. Okay? By far, those are the two reasons they would hire you, not whether you're currently interviewing with somebody else. I have to start wrapping this up soon, so we've got about 5 or 6 questions. I'll take another 6 questions or so, and then I have to wrap this up. But let's see, we got Mr. D, my buddy Mr. D, a member of the B team. The position also is still open after 10 months. I checked it yesterday on LinkedIn. Is this a huge red flag for the company? Yes. Yes, it is. Yeah, and that's common. We see that a lot with posted jobs, especially with organizations that are not particularly good. Just excuse me for one moment. Oh, I can feel my face turning red like a beetroot. It's a lot of talking. And I tend to talk loud when I'm passionate. So I'm here in this little tiny room, talking really loud. Okay, yes. Yeah, there's some companies that just leave job postings up all the time. There's many reasons for that. None of them are good. Okay? If you see that, don't sweat it. Just move on. Is the reason for so many requirements for junior is because companies do not want to train? That's part of it. Like back in the day, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, it was a common practice to hire somebody that's good, that's highly trainable, and then train them. We have largely gotten away from that. Okay. What they're looking for is they're looking for someone who can start right away, and within like a few days, they can start being productive. There's no learning curve. That explains a lot of the hiring practices we've seen lately. Okay. Like, for example, requiring experience for an entry-level job, right? It's this type of thinking that drives that. Okay. So yeah. And the other thing is that training is tricky for organizations because if you don't train your employees, you save money on training, you can offer them more compensation. If you do train them, it means that ultimately you can't offer them as much compensation because all things being equal, you have extra cost. So what we see is that if you are the company that offers training and your competitors don't, what we see is a lot of people starting out will come to your company, they'll get trained, and then they'll leave and go work at your competitor. That way they get the best of both worlds. They get on-the-job training from you, but then they get the higher compensation from your competitors, right? There are ways around that. Like you can say, if I train you, I'm going to make you sign a contract saying you give back the money if you leave before a certain amount of time. But it still doesn't really overcome all the difficulties. So that's another thing driving a lot of companies to not train employees. They want employees that within a few days, bam, they're doing their job, they're productive, they don't need training. Remember, the way around this, like everything else, is the hidden job market. You can shortcut all these systemic problems by getting a job on the hidden job market using networking. Gav says, applied for a job with a particular salary. I was told in the interview. Okay, hold your salary questions for next live stream. Sorry, that's going to be the topic of my next live stream. Your videos are the best. Your advice straightforward. Thank you. Thank you, Desert Meadow. That's very nice of you to say. I appreciate it. Dr. Sim says, an interviewer asked me if I had children. I said yes. The tone of the interview changed. I knew I wouldn't be selected. Yeah, that's how that goes. They don't have the right to ask that question. And if they do, you don't answer. You just say like, well, that's a highly personal question you're asking. I actually prefer not to answer those. It's also not really. And then just I prefer to talk about how I'm qualified. And then you lead the conversation back. And you try to have the big smile on your face and make it as pleasant as possible. You don't want to be like, no, it's illegal that you asked me that, because that really hurts you in the department of whether they like you or not. And that's, as we've talked about the number one factor. So they may have made an honest mistake. I'm being very generous here, but it might have been benign. And unless there's a problem, just give them the benefit of the doubt. You don't have to answer it, but be pleasant and steer it back to, how you'd rather talk about how you're qualified. Gav says, I interviewed for a senior role. During the fourth interview, the interviewer let slip they had shoulder tapped an internal candidate. Yeah, that's not uncommon. That's actually quite common. And Relax says, hi, Relax. Relax, taking it easy for all of us. You speak with conviction. Yeah, because I'm mad. No, I'm just joking. It's ridiculous. I've been on the receiving end of some of this unprofessional behavior earlier on in my career. I've also observed in the last 20 years how this stuff has just sort of grown and become even more prevalent. And right now, it's disgraceful how the recruitment and selection function of a lot of organizations treat people, especially younger people just starting out that aren't prepared for this level of weapons grade baloney that they're going to be encountering. People lying straight to your face, being completely unprofessional, completely disingenuous, and it's a walking advertisement for why you should not work at that organization. It's doing a lot of damage. What you save in efficiency gains in your HR metrics, you lose in intangibles like creating negative goodwill around your company and your brand. It's bad on a personal level and it's bad on a business level. And the reason why this is done usually is because people are either malevolent or they're just completely incompetent. I don't know which one's worse, Elsa RM sent me a super chat. Thank you very much. Is that actually, that's a super sticker, isn't it? It's got the little icon doing this, right? Got the 2 thumbs up, right? Thank you very much. I appreciate that. That's very kind of you. If you had a question, I'd be happy to take it. I will prioritize people with the super chat if you had a question. Okay, I know I said 6. We're going to go down to Jamin, the most recent one. Or how about Travis? That's it. And that's my cutoff. So Santa Trinita says, it is unfavorably when the candidate is potentially going to get a 55% raise for a job, even when currently doing the same job. We're going to hold that for the next live stream where I talk all about salary. I'll address all of that then. Thank you for the great session today. This is the first time I tuned in. I'll be sure to follow the next time. Much appreciated. Well, thank you for being here, Christian. I appreciate it, and I hope that it was at least somewhat helpful. I swear by networking for work. Well, good. Yeah, that's how the world works, unfortunately. And I just want you to know that if you're I got to keep saying this each time. If you're an introvert, if you don't know 1,000 people, that's okay. You can do this. You're going to do it. If you're an introvert, you're probably going to do it more online than in person talking to people. But you can do this every bit as well as someone who knows 1 million people. Okay, it has nothing to do with having friends in high places. It's about creating those relationships and those contacts. And it's a mechanical process like any other. Desim says, thank you. Thank you, Desim. Thank you for being here. Jamin says, how long to work at a company before it's okay to leave so it doesn't look like you're a job hopper? Well, listen, everybody's going to have a different answer for that. 2 years for sure is, if you work for 2 years and then leave, no one's going to think you're a job hopper. I get the impression that most recruiters will see a red flag if you work for less than a year at several places. Okay. I think if you work for less than a year at one place, that's not a problem. But like if you have sort of the last 4 jobs you've worked, they've all been for less than a year, like a matter of months or weeks, that will be a red flag. That could indicate that, you may be a job hopper, someone that doesn't intend to stay very long, or someone who has to leave because something's not working out with them. And therefore you'd be seen as a riskier candidate. Okay. Yeah, so there we go. So listen, that's where I have to cut it off for today, because we've hit the 2-hour mark. So thank you very much. Listen, just to conclude, I want to say that this entire process, this whole job search activity, okay, is a dog and pony show. It's based on a lot of factors, most of them that don't concern you. It's based on the nature of the world. It's based on the values and opinions of people in large companies. Each organization you interview with, they will view you a different way. You don't have control over any of that process. The only thing you have control over is yourself. So keep looking. Try and create as much opportunities as you can. Try to go to as many interviews as you can, because it is a numbers game. Okay? And if you do get rejected, which you will, sometimes you'll get rejected for the stupidest reasons you ever thought possible, and some things you never thought were possible. As much as possible, try not to take it to heart. Just realize that this isn't normal and it's just a numbers game. And it's not a reflection on you in any way. It's a reflection on how you fit with these people's sometimes crazy expectations and their inability to assess people. Okay? So hopefully that helps. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate every one of you guys for being here, especially everybody who has said stuff in the chat. You guys are awesome. And I will be doing another one of these live streams on Wednesday. I will leave this stream up for a couple of days, and then I'm going to be moving all my live streams over to my second channel, The Company's Expert 2. There's a link in the description, or you could just do a search for The Company's Expert 2. That's where I'm going to be archiving the streams. And but I'm going to still stream on this channel. And it's looking like Sundays and Wednesdays. So hopefully that you're able to join me there. Don't forget that if you want to go deeper, if you're looking for a job, you can check out my channel. I've got a lot of videos on how to answer job interview questions and how to pass interviews and alternate ways of getting jobs. In addition, if you want a much more systematic thing, end to end, I've got 2 courses. One is called Get Hired, everything you need to know to get hired, all in one place. It's quite extensive. And the other course is called the $100 MBA. So if you are interested in learning everything you would learn in an MBA from the same textbooks as people in university who take an MBA, check out that course, the $100 MBA. Link in description. Thank you to my members who have joined my channel. They clicked the join button. I think it's only on the desktop, but they're members. They get priority for answering questions, and they also get an extra video from me every week. So if that's of interest to you, feel free to join. I would appreciate it. And other than that, thank you so much for being here. If you're going through some hard times right now, remember, it will get better. This is temporary. Take heart, and I will see you on the next live stream in a few days. Take care.